Clayton Cranford is a law enforcement professional with over 20 years of experience serving in vital roles such as school resource officer, juvenile investigator, and behavioral threat assessor. As a recognized authority in law enforcement education, Clayton is one of the nation's foremost experts in social media, child safety, and behavioral threat assessments. He's the founder of Cyber Safety Cop and Total Safety Solutions, LLC, and author of Parenting in the Digital World, which provides parents with practical tools to navigate the challenges of protecting their kids in the digital age. Thank you, Clayton, for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So the first thing I want to talk to you about is crime rates. So according to a 2024 Pew poll, both the FBI and BJS data show dramatic declines in U.S. crime rates since the early 1990s, with violent crime, for example, falling 71% between 1993 and 2022. Yet 60% of U.S. adults have said they believe there is more crime. According to FBI Internet Crime Center report, in 2020, the crime against children increased by 144% compared to 2019. So are kids overprotected in the real world and underprotected in the virtual world?
Yeah, I think the premise that you're coming at is absolutely correct. So this is the safest time in human history for our children. It's much safer today than it was when we were children, in the 80s especially. And the chances of your child being a victim of some kind of physical violence is super low. In fact, if you're not the kind of parent who would abuse their child, the chances of them ever experiencing physical abuse is almost zero, which is great. Like we've really come a long way in that way. So I don't think that they're overprotected. I think the perception is completely skewed because parents think that their children are less safe, like you said, and it may be because of 24-hour news and so when you ask a parent, why are you giving your elementary student a phone or middle school, whatever, it's always about safety. They have safety concerns. And so we go to schools all over the United States. We talk to students K through 12. And when I started doing this more than 12 years ago, I never talked to the littles, the K through 3. The earliest I would talk to students was in the 4th grade, and I felt like that was pushing it. But then a handful of years ago, it became necessary because very, very young children are getting phones and smartwatches and tablets and everything. So when we go talk to students, littles, like I was at a elementary school just yesterday up in Los Alamitos, and I asked them, raise your hand if you have a phone. The K through 3, about 25% of them raise their hands. Yeah. So, and then when I ask, who plays games online like Roblox with people you don't know, every hand goes up. Yeah. So what's happened is that parents, by thinking this is keeping them safer, is really opening a door to them to a world that would never have been available otherwise, and the people in that world and the opportunities for them to be sexually exploited. The data is showing that it's like 60% of teens have experienced somebody soliciting them for nude images. So it's a real problem that is one of the things that I'm trying to do in parent presentations is dispel this myth that your child is safe with a phone.
Yeah, I mean, I think a really simple way of putting it is let's take predators, for example. I mean, they're going to go where the kids are, right? So if the kids are all online, I mean, it makes sense that a lot of that behavior has moved there, right? Isn't that like a really simple way of looking at it?
Oh, it couldn't be simpler. You have kids who would not in a million years would talk to a strange adult on the street. If that adult walks up to them, and I give them this exact scenario in my presentation. If an adult man you didn't know walked up to you on the street and said, "Hey, where do you live? Where you go to school? Can I see pictures of you and your friends?" Kids would run in the direction. They wouldn't do that in a million years. But then, the average middle schooler or high schooler has 400 or 500 friends, followers on social media. And I asked the students, what percentage of those are people you don't know? And they say 80%. So And then how does that happen? Because they basically get a request, they look at the picture, and if it looks like someone their age, they let them in.
Yeah.
Then I ask students, do you think people fake who they are online for the purpose of hurting and scamming you? And they all say yes. And they say this is a real problem. I go, well, so tell me how this makes sense. Like, it's not safe to share who you are, where you live, all that information with a stranger who walked up to you. But then online, you have hundreds of followers. 80% of them are people you don't know. You let them in based on an image you said could be fake and could be fake for the purpose of hurting you. And you're sharing the exact information you said you wouldn't share with the guy who saw you face to face. So I say, does this make sense? And the kids kind of look at me like I got three heads. They're like, no, you're right. It doesn't make sense. So they're in a scenario where they are leveraging, they're not leveraging the good decision-making part of their brain, the prefrontal cortex. They're leveraging the fight or flight, the dopamine reward pathway of their brain. What's exciting right now.
Yeah.
And inviting people in and sharing with them. They're not thinking about consequences. They're just thinking like, how do I feel right now? And that is landing a lot of kids in some really horrible situations, and many are being victimized.
Yeah. And to your point about all the followers, audience growth is a form of social validation online. And as you said, thank you for bringing up the reward center. Their reward center is highly active during this time, right? So even though they know it's wrong, they almost can't help themselves, right? Because their brain is really seeking those rewards that much. So,
yeah.
But it's interesting that the conscious brain tends to know what's right and wrong, though. That's interesting that you pointed that out.
Yeah, no, cognitively they know this doesn't make sense. The problem is that, and after talking to hundreds of thousands of students over the last decade, I've come to the conclusion that it doesn't matter what they know, because kids today know more about internet safety than kids 10 years ago, but we got more victimization today than ever. So really what it boils down is what they believe. What do they believe about the internet and their place in it, in social media? And really what the issue is that although they know it doesn't make sense, they believe that the real world and the digital world are two different worlds. So what we do online doesn't have the same connection to consequences that what we do in the real world, until something bad happens and they realize, oh my gosh, there is real consequences here. So it just doesn't feel, it feels safe. It doesn't feel consequential. And they're more likely to do impulsive things.
Yeah. So let's push on that a little bit more. What are the main safety concerns that parents can look out for if they allow their kids to go online independently?
Well, I see it as like there's kind of a couple really existential threats to our kids. Things that we really should be concerned about as parents, not concerned about them being abducted by strangers or being a casualty school shooting, which both of those are very, very, very low. Like so low, it's not zero, but it's so low that it's, as a parent, it doesn't make sense to give them a phone if you're thinking that's fixing this problem, when you have, young girls since 2010, when, we introduced the iPhone 4, and from 2010 to 2015, we went from 20% of teens having smartphones to about 80+% had smartphones by 2015.
Yeah.
And what we see is a major rise in anxiety, depression, and non-suicidal self-injury. Girls are injuring themselves today at 300% higher than they were in 2010. Anxiety and depression 140, 160%, depending on the age group, and whether it's a male or female student. So their mental health to me is, I think, should be the first thing that we should be really concerned about, because we have, something like 20% of teens in a health survey that they do every year in school said that they think about suicide. Within the last 30 days, 20% of teens said that they thought about suicide. We have a lot of kids hurting themselves to deal with their feelings. So this is a direct result. I think there's a strong correlation to giving them devices, giving them social media. And then the other thing I would say is sexual exploitation. So we have a lot of children who are sharing nude images of themselves with friends, or boyfriend, girlfriend, perhaps, or complete strangers. And there's a very prevalent scam going on right now where you have a person soliciting these images from your child, usually a teen boy, They appear to be a cute girl online, and then once they get the boy to manipulate into sending an image, immediately get a message saying, if you don't give me $500, I'm gonna send this to everyone you know, it's gonna destroy your life.
Yeah.
And then of course when you share those with someone you do know, there's a percentage of those that also result in sexual exploitation, and we also have the sexual exploitation of creating online sex abuse material, which means that person isn't interested in money. What they want is they want to extort that child to creating more child sex abuse material for them.
Mm-hmm.
So what you end up having is a child who thinks, I can't tell my mom and dad
Yeah.
because I'm afraid what they're going to say. I can't let this person send these images because it will ruin my life. And then we have nearly 30 kids last year taking their own lives because they felt like that was the only way out of this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very underreported crime. I probably have a parent every other week calling me and saying, Clay, I saw you at my kid's school last year or 2 years ago, and now I need to talk to you because my son did the thing that he said he would never do. He sent an image, and now we have a person calling or texting saying they want money. So most of these people don't go to law enforcement. They just tell the person to buzz off, and as long as their kid is healthy and not in trouble, they just move on.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is underreported, and it's a growing problem. And then thirdly, I think the other one is children's access to dangerous illegal drugs,
Mm-hmm.
namely fentanyl. And one of the main ways that they're doing that is meeting drug dealers through social media, Instagram, and primarily Snapchat.
Yeah.
And basically, it's like Uber Eats. They drive the drugs right to your house.
Yeah.
And drop them off to your kid over the door sill. So, those are kind of the main things, and we talk about those in our parent presentation. But really, what I'm trying to do with parents is I'm kind of like, metaphorically trying to grab them by the shoulders, to just kind of shake them and say, hey, like, we got to snap out of it. Like, we got to resist the cultural trajectory of giving our children phones at earlier and earlier ages. Mm-hmm. Because it's crushing our kids' souls and their mental health. And if we don't do this, there will be a point where it will be so bad that we can't ignore it. And I don't want to see that point when we hit rock bottom, when we have multiple kids killing themselves in every school district that we have. And then finally we're like, what's going on? And then we're like, oh, maybe we should be taking their phones away, or not giving them phones until they're in high school, not giving them social media until they're 16. I'm so thankful that we have school districts now starting to ban phones in schools. I think that's just brilliant, and it's going to really help. But really what we need is parents to kind of take up this torch and say, as a group of parents in this community, whatever that community is, say, we're just going to, as a parent group, say, we're not doing this. We're not giving our kids phones. We're not giving them smartphones until high school. We're not going to give them social media until they're 16. And if every parent did that, you wouldn't have a kid coming home and saying, Mom, every kid in my classroom has it, and I don't have it. And I won't have friends if I don't have it.
Yeah.
And we have parents caving.
Yeah. I mean, I tell my parents the same thing, which is that we're the front line. Do you know what I mean? To the collective action problem. Like, if we don't give in the first place, we wouldn't have social exclusion. We wouldn't have all these issues that we're dealing with. It wouldn't be so overwhelming. I'm one of the parents that delays. My kids are 8 and 11. And I have many reasons. The biggest one being I just know too much about it. I've been a social media marketer since 2007. But one of the reasons I don't do it is I find it overwhelming to manage all this stuff. Like, I just don't want to deal with it yet. There's just like, what's the reason? Yes, social exclusion is hard. But like you said, the more parents that band together, then we can start to solve that collective action problem is kind of what we're talking about here, right? Where one single family, one single kid can't solve this problem. And then the second line to me absolutely is in schools. If we can at least remove it in a place where kids gather and allow them to do what they need to do to grow and thrive, which is play, talk to each other, focus on their academics. That's huge, but it absolutely begins with the parents, and I don't blame them. It is the status quo. You mentioned that earlier. The statistics are staggering, how many kids have them and how much younger it's getting. So I don't blame parents for not pushing back. It's a big battle, but they are the front line.
No, and it like, when your kid is little, it starts at a very young age now, where, you're in a car ride, you're
Yeah.
sitting at dinner with your family, uh, as soon as your kid is fussy, I mean, they slide them the screen,
Yeah.
and you're like, wow, we actually have a quiet meal together. Like, this is amazing. I
Yeah.
remember, my boys are 21 and 23. So when, obviously when they're little infant guys, there was no smartphones.
Yeah.
And I remember like having to grab my kid and throw him on my shoulder and walking out of the middle of
Yeah.
meals and just
Yeah.
saying, we just can't do this. So,
Sure.
it just, that's just what it is. But now you have, like, you can slide them the iPad and things are
Yeah.
much better now. The problem is that your child never learns to regulate their own emotions.
Yeah.
And they get to the point where they need that device, or they need to game, they need to be on Fortnite or whatever to feel good. And the other thing is, I think parents, we don't, and maybe our society in general, just aren't comfortable talking about mental health issues and our feelings.
Yeah.
And we have a culture that really is kind of a down on negative emotions, I guess is the best way to say it. Like, negative emotions, anxiety and depression, or not depression, but anxiety and fear and shame and things like that. Those aren't a bug. Those are a feature. There's a reason why we feel that way. And if you never really kind of get a grip on those and kind of self-regulate yourself, and you have to scroll on your phone to kind of shut down that part of your brain, or jump on a video game, it's just, you're just not really building a healthy human being that way. And you have a kid who's, anxious because a test is coming up and they're not studying for it, which is a good reason to be feeling anxious. But they're like, well, I'll just jump on TikTok for a while and make that feeling go away, because I
Yeah.
don't like that feeling. But then the test comes, whether you like it or not, and they don't do well in the test, and then now they feel shame and guilt for not
Mhm.
doing well in the test, which is actually really good thing. You should be feeling that way, because that'll make you want to work harder and not do that again. But then they jump back on TikTok and they make that feeling go away. So we just kind of creating this situation, and these children are not getting jobs and buying these phones themselves, are they?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
parents, and I'm like you, I do not judge a parent for jumping on this train, because we basically, we didn't know what we were getting ourselves into,
Mhm.
and now the game's kind of rigged against us.
Yeah.
Not only do our kids, or some schools are even making it such that I had a parent saying, my kid's on a club soccer team or something, and they have to have Instagram to know what's going on with the team.
Yeah.
You
I
know what I mean?
know.
So we're kind of like in systems that are, requiring this. And it's just more and more difficult for parents to make a decision to say, I'm going to wait.
Yeah. There was so much in what you just said. One of the things that stood out to me is, when you talked about the device being the digital pacifier and not
Mhm.
being able to regulate emotion. One of the things that we teach kids and the adults is it's okay to be bored. And by the way, boredom's good. It activates a special part of your brain where creativity happens, where problem solving happens. But to your point, I think people are very uncomfortable sitting
Mhm.
in negative emotions because boredom is painful, right?
Mhm.
But we can be conditioned to it. My kids certainly are, and I know you and I are probably from a similar era where we didn't have a choice but to be bored as kids, right? And we
Yeah.
would create things to do. And again, I don't want to be that person talking down to the next generation, talking about in my day it was better. That's not the point. But the point is that it's actually kids, parents think it's easier to just give them the iPad or give them the phone or whatever. But it actually, I think, and I've had experts agree with me on this, it actually makes it harder in the long run because there was never a moment where your kids can occupy themselves without this, iPad or iPhone or whatever being around. And you can't do it 24 hours a day, right? So these kids
Mhm.
aren't even building the ability to make their own fun either,
Right.
or socialize or do the things that they're supposed to be doing at their age. So it's a little bit of work in the beginning,
Yeah.
to delay, to not give it, but in the long run, you're gonna have kids that can sit through things, that can be bored in a waiting room, that can sit in a restaurant and have a conversation with you. It's worth it in the long run. It really is
Mhm.
easier in the long run. I don't know if you agree with that, but that's my point of
No,
view from
1
this.
million percent.
Yeah.
I agree with that 100%. And it's just, yeah, I just feel like we're conditioned,
Yeah.
in our society to, because like if your kid is fussing and everybody's looking at them in the restaurant, and everybody's like, why don't you just give your kid a phone?
Yeah.
And like, but like we used to bring, action figures and
Sure.
Hot Wheels and crayons, and it was like you have to, you have to do something here, to occupy yourself.
Yeah.
And it's just, yeah, things have changed. What's interesting is, a lot of times I just ask parents, like, what do you want for your kid? Like, what do you like? And I usually ask them, like, imagine what it was like for you, or, the average teens on social media or on screens, non-school screens, just, fun screens, like
Yeah.
8.5 hours a day. Right.
Hmm.
So I say, parents, think back on when you were in middle school and high school, and think about like the really amazing, fun experiences that just kind of like nostalgically kind of go back. Right. And I guarantee those memories are going to be about you and friends doing things, maybe just like, laughing your heads off about something stupid, or maybe you did like things that I did, a little dangerous, somehow survived. But like we did these things, and to some degree made us who we are as human beings. And we would never want to trade those for a million years. And I go, just imagine if I took away 70 or 80% of that. Because if you're online 8.5 hours a day, there's not, beyond school, there's no time
Yeah.
to do any of this. Or, what do you want your child to think about relationships and love
Hmm.
and respecting a partner in a relationship? Because the internet and online pornography is teaching them the exact opposite thing that you would want your child to believe about what a respectful, loving relationship looks like.
Yeah.
It'll all the things that are important to you, probably your values and the things that you think are important. The internet is replacing those values with a counterfeit experience that's similar, right? It's approximate to kind of what you would have in a real life face-to-face experience. So to some degree kind of satisfies some of those things that we need as human beings. So that's why it kind of works. But it's not as good. Like, it's a counterfeit, and actually it's going to lead to something that is not as valuable as the real thing. Always,
Yeah.
counterfeits are never that way. And it's going to lead your child to be the kind of person down a road that maybe you don't want for your child.
Yeah.
I think most parents, when they sit there and think about it, they're like, yeah, you're right. I wouldn't want to have that childhood, but that's the childhood we're giving our children right now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit more too about surveillance parenting, which you touched on a little bit in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the phenomenon that we're seeing now, which is the oversight of kids using tech tools. So GPS tracking, things like homework portal access, parents logging in and micromanaging what their kids are doing with schoolwork, and then continuous texting, right? Being in
Mm-hmm.
touch all day, constantly during the day with their kids. So are kids safer? I know we covered mental health a little bit about this, but are kids actually safer because parents are tracking and monitoring their every movement?
Not at all. In fact, it's creating a lot of anxiety. It's mostly parent anxiety. All
Yeah.
this is driven by parent fear that, again, does not line up with the facts.
Yep.
But for sure, and also it's creating a really adversarial situation with your kid, because I ask parents again, would you want a boss who's on your shoulder 24/7 and
Yeah.
being like, have you done it? Have you done it? Have you done it? Like no, nobody wants that. Your kid doesn't want that.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you don't give your kid a phone until they're in high school, then you don't need to monitor anything. I mean, if you give your kid a phone, you have to monitor that phone. You
Yep.
have to put something on there like Our Pact or Bark or something like that on your. I like
Yep.
Our Pact because it works really well on iPhones, and it makes the screen time management like super simple. But like, you have to do that then. But if you don't give them a phone, you don't have to do it. You don't
Yep.
have to give them a GPS watch. It's not necessary. They're
Mhm.
not going to be abducted by a stranger. That's less than 100 kids a year in the entire United States, out of 72 million children, are abducted by a stranger. The chances of that happening are like more likely going to be attacked by a shark or something. Like, it's just
Yeah.
so low. So yeah, it's interesting. I don't quite. I've seen some theories about why parents are this way, like my generation of parents. But if anything, we should be pulling back. We need to be pulling back on the intense management that we have going on with our kids. Letting them play outside. Don't manage that. Don't like set up play dates and say, this is what we're going to do. Like, this is how your friends are going to play together. Like, let your kid play, let them figure it out. Let them, violate, the rules of the game, and let the kids work it out. Like, all the things that should be happening socially between kids when they're playing together, and let it be unsupervised. Like, we really don't need to be hovering over our kids while they're playing. It's on us as parents. It's not about their kids. And certainly if we don't give them phones, we don't have to monitor it. As soon as you give your kid a phone, you have to monitor it, because now you're opening this portal to 3.5 billion people online, and maybe 2% of them are creeps.
Yeah.
And that's like 70 million people. So, and like you said, they're all hanging out where the kids are hanging out, like TikTok and places like that.
I mean, that resonates so much with me because I'm waiting till high school. That's the new expert consensus, thankfully, because I was the weirdo for a long time where nobody understood why. But really, iPhone in particular, I know there's ones made for kids, but it's an adult product. You could put the retrofit on, you could put Bark, which is great. That's the one we recommend. But at the end of the day, the fact that you have to monitor something tells me it's not for the kid. It's not built for the kid, right? If you have to oversee it. So that's a really important distinction right there. Yeah. And then for me, and I've heard this from other experts well, it's not just me, but I want my kids to have resilience. I don't want them to be able to text me for any little thing that goes sideways, in their day. They're not ever without adult supervision. They're either, with a parent or a teacher or anything else. Like, there's just no reason why I need to reach them directly. And I want him to feel a little uncomfortable if I'm a few minutes late, and kind of be looking out for me and wondering what's going on. Like, these are, again, going back to never being uncomfortable, like, these are experiences that kids need to build resilience, right? I don't want him to text me, when are you coming? Or what should I do about this? Or my friend said this, or my teacher said this. Like, figure those things out. And that's just the way, and again, maybe it's because I'm Gen X and that was the experience, I grew up with, and I'm comfortable with that. But I do think there's a lot there about this idea that we're taking away struggle and resilience from our kids too, by being their constant lifeline all day.
Yeah.
So,
like you can't, they can't make a decision, and their anxiety's through the roof because they're afraid they're going to make the wrong choice. Yeah. I tell you, it's okay for you to blow it. Like, this is the perfect time for you to make a bad choice, because we can fix it. Like, we can learn and move on. The problem is when you give a kid a phone, they make a bad choice on that phone, they can't take it back. Yeah. I don't think parents really kind of wrapping their brains around this. Like, the bad choices that you and I made as kids is a rumor right now. Yeah. And I went to my 30th high school reunion, and we're standing around talking about who did what, and like, the grace of getting older, we're kind of forgetting who did the things. So, like, our kids don't get that. As soon as they hit that send button, I was on the threat assessment team. Yeah. And I did hundreds of threat assessments. Most of them were happening on devices, right? The threat would go out on social media. And you have a kid who made an inappropriate joke online, and then everybody shares this image, right? Yeah. And now that student, even though they had no intention of hurting anybody, it was a bad choice, they can't go back to that school. Because if that kid goes back to that school, all the other parents know is that this kid posted a picture of like an airsoft gun, and that kid's back in my kid's school. Yeah. And that can't happen. And so that kid is, it's like pitchforks and, torches come out, and that kid has to, go to another school, and there's no grace. Yeah. There's no grace whatsoever. So yeah, parents really don't understand what they're getting their kids into. And sometimes when I'm talking, especially I'm talking to middle schoolers, I sometimes get a sick feeling in my stomach when we're talking about this stuff. And I just almost want to stop and say, I'm so sorry. Yeah. That we have to talk, that you're living, now you're choosing to live in an adult world. Like, we have to talk about adult stuff, and they're not ready for it. I talk to them about sexting and sexual exploitation, and they're all kind of, like, they're, And I'm like, you guys don't get it.
Yeah.
This is real. And yeah,
Yeah.
anything's possible.
I don't want to be dramatic, but once you hand them that smartphone, childhood's over, because now they're being exposed to adult experiences, adult
Mhm.
content, completely out of order of development, right? So back to your point about giggling, like, yeah, we shouldn't be having these conversations yet, but yet we have to, if we're connected,
Yeah.
because that's what's happening on there.
Really, all they should be worrying about is, bicycling over to their friend's house and hanging out.
Yeah.
Like the things that we did. Like that's
Right.
it bums me out. Yeah, you're right. I feel like they're just lost that innocence
Yeah.
and carefreeness that they should have. And now they
Yeah.
live in this world where they're just afraid. Or they're in places that they really should be afraid, but they don't understand what they're getting themselves into. And I've seen kids broken
Yeah.
in ways that cannot be easily or at all fixed. I've just
Yeah.
seen some horrible things. So I loved being a school resource officer. It was the best part of my 20-year career when I get to go to schools and talk to kids and talk to parents. And as a parent myself, I love seeing like healthy families. It brings me a lot of joy, actually. And so when I stand in front of parents now, I'm like, I put on a bullet resistant vest and a badge and a gun and went to your kid's school because I love your kids. I love you. And I got to tell you something from a person who really cares about you. Like, we are going in the wrong direction right now. And
Yeah.
I just, I'm not sure what to say. Cause even when I tell parents, don't give your kids Snapchat ever until they're an adult. Like my
Yeah.
boys didn't get Snapchat and they're in college. Because like you said, I know too much about it.
Mm-hmm.
I've had parents who've went against that recommendation, even maybe when they walked out of my presentation, like, yeah, you're right, I should never do that. Because I tell a lot of stories. But then they cave because their kid's a good kid and their kid's like, I won't
Sure.
mess
It's not
up and
going
I'm
to
getting
happen
good
to
grades.
me. Yeah.
Won't happen to me.
Yeah.
And then they call me and they're like, Clay, I made a horrible choice. And
Yeah.
so I just don't know, reality or experience is a cruel, teacher, right? Like
Yeah.
but if your kid gets hurt in those ways, you can't take it back. You
Yeah.
can't undo that. So I'm not quite sure what we can say to parents to really get through. And perhaps, like I said earlier, maybe it won't be until things are so bad
Yeah.
that it can't be ignored. But I really hope it doesn't take that.
I know. Well, not to double down on something that is hard to talk about, but I did want to ask you specifically about pornography. I know you brought it up in the beginning, and I kind of want to ask it in the context of schools, because that's another thing we've been talking about a lot. So the statistics are 73% of teens have been exposed to pornography. Most have seen it by age 13. 80% of porn is consumed on mobile devices. 41% of teens have seen it during the school day. 44% on school-owned devices. I know there's a lot of numbers there, but I want to get to kind of the liability aspects. So lawsuits have been filed over kids as young as 11 viewing pornography at school, sometimes on school-issued devices like iPads. So in addition to the potential harm of kids seeing inappropriate content at school, which we've covered, I think, already quite a bit, what are some of the other liabilities for school leaders to consider if they're bringing tech into the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, you're opening a gateway for kids to see a bunch of different things. So whether it's, you have sexual pornography for sure. You have kids who watch extreme violence.
Yeah.
I mean, we have live videos coming out of war zones, and you can literally see people murdered or whatever. So like Live Leak is a really popular video platform where you see these kinds of things. So yeah, kids are being exposed to things that they're not healthy for their brains. And especially for somebody who had to experience those things firsthand, because it was part of my job. Like when I'm a police officer, I'm going into situations like you can't look away. You got to deal with what you're dealing with there. Like those things you can't really get rid of them. And that's why I never watch a horror film, because I don't need to put made up horrible things in my brain. We already have experience the real thing. But
Yeah.
our kids, um, there's just a lot there. And yes, I believe on top of the questionable efficacy of having a lot of screen technology to teach your child, like you know, there's that, right? Like, is that really helpful for your kid? And are they going to learn and build like a really robust brain by using a lot of screen technology? But yes, are you also opening them up to different material that no matter what filter you have, it's not going to be foolproof? And then is the school going to be a school district to be liable for that? And
Yeah.
so that is absolutely happening. But you have kids. But now that if schools are taking away or banning the phones during the school day, so putting them in a pouch or a locker or
Yeah.
something, it's going to help this a lot because
Yep.
of my experience working with students as a school resource officer. Most of that kind of exposure was happening on a mobile device that was using their cellular data, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not through the Wi-Fi for the school or through the school device, but through their own phone. And
Yep.
so that's happening all the time. So now that's kind of, that will help for the school day. Obviously, it doesn't fix the other times that they're using devices, but I go into why this is a problem for your kid's brain and how to talk to your kid about it quite deeply in my parent presentation. I don't know a lot of people who do what I do who actually talk about pornography, but I think it's actually very, very important.
Yeah.
My book has an entire chapter about it. I wrote there's an ebook on my website about how to talk to your kid about it. But to me, it's very similar to the talk that you should have with your kid about why they should not take street drugs.
Yeah.
It's really the same conversation because
Yeah.
sooner or later, your kid is going to have an opportunity and they need a reason to say no. It can't
Yeah.
just be, I'm pretty sure mom and dad don't like it. So
Yeah.
I really encourage parents to talk to your kid about this. And it's so difficult because their biology is telling them they should be looking at it.
Yeah.
Right. It's stimulating the reward pleasure center of their brain. Your brain thinks it's a mating opportunity. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
rewarding that. And they're seeing it at levels that are very different than when we were kids, right?
Oh
Like, what did
yeah.
we have? A magazine? So now these
Yeah.
kids have, Pornhub or whatever, and they're looking at thousands of videos and like all dopamine kind of experiences. After a while, the novelty will wear off and then they got to
Mm-hmm.
move on to more extreme forms.
Yeah.
And so now your child is traveling in a direction on those pornographic sites that lead them to very, where they normalize humiliation and
Yep.
painful and hurtful things that are happening on there. The women are not consenting to what's happening. It's
Yep.
just a really upside down portrayal of a relationship that your kid doesn't understand is a fantasy. They
Right.
think this is real and this is how they're teaching themselves. And we as parents don't like talking about sex and all the things.
Yeah.
So we were kind of leaving it up to the internet, and that's not healthy for our kids.
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered it all. It's addictive, first of all. Like you said, it's not like what it used to be, it's potent, it's intense, it's hardcore. Like it's not the Playboy, that people in our generation grew up. But I think also because of that, kids are actually having some of their first experiences through this. So it's affecting their real world relationships as well. And one of the biggest things I worry about is failure to launch. Again, this idea that of opportunity cost. If I can just get online and take care of my primal instincts that way, as you put it, like, why do I need to go in the real world? And
Yeah.
Not to get off on this topic, but birth rates are down. People aren't finding mates. They're not buying homes. Like, this is just my armchair theory. There have been other people that talk about failure to launch that connected the dots, but it's definitely a piece of the puzzle. It's not everything to blame, but it's definitely part of it.
Right. It's going back to it's a counterfeit, right? It's an experience that does kind of meet some of those physical needs and the intimacy need that we have, but doesn't really fulfill you. It's not a real experience, but it's good enough. It's just good enough that you really, and plus if you have anxiety and you have, and you're anxious and, going out and meeting somebody and looking at someone in the eyeball,
Yeah.
and say, do you want to go on a date with me, or like whatever, go to the dance with me. If you can't do that, then you're just going to kind of backslide into these other experiences that don't have that the cost
Right.
associated
Again,
with it.
we're not building resilience, right? We're not getting the rejection. We're not getting the things that we need to
Yeah.
become successful humans,
Yeah. When we
frankly.
got rejected, we had no other choice but try again.
Yeah,
Right. There
exactly.
was nothing else
Try it
for
a
us.
different way. Be better, be more charming, whatever
Yeah.
it is.
Or just
Yeah.
keep trying. Yeah. Whatever.
Yeah. I want to just ask you about a couple more school things, because your expertise there is so critical, I think, with the momentum that you've already talked about with phone-free schools and things like that. This is from a 2024 World Health Organization study. So it's 1 in 6 adolescents have experienced cyberbullying. I'm sure you have your own stats on this too, but it's up 25% since 2018. 11% of adolescents say they've been bullied at school. It has been widely documented that group text and social media lead to actual physical fights in schools. I don't think people realize this. So what can parents and school leaders, again, do to address this issue, which is mental health, but it's also safety?
Yeah, so the vast majority of these experiences, they're happening online. The group text thing, I don't know if parents really understand like how big a deal this is at
Yes.
schools, especially even kids who don't have phones, because now you have they're given a school device, and maybe it's like a Chromebook, and they're using Google Workspace essentially. They can create a Google Doc or a Google Slide or whatever, and they can share it with other students, and they can actually type into it, and it's basically text messaging. So they all can collaborate, and you can literally see people typing as they're doing it. So even if your kid doesn't have a phone, they might be in a group kind of talk situation, and it might be in one of these collaborative documents.
Yeah.
And they're actually getting smart about using slang or symbols for words, so they don't, because these schools also have applications that scan the cloud of their documents, the students' documents, and looking for problematic words, threats, and so forth. So it won't get flagged because they're using words that represent other words. So anyway, I do think this is a problem. I do also feel, though, however, that when parents are talking about bullying, and I don't think they even understand just how caustic in general the whole situation is for kids, how just the way they talk to each other, just normatively, it's like really unhealthy, especially when they're gaming, when kids are on headsets and they're gaming or they're text spacing. The things kids say to each other would, get you fired in a heartbeat. Like, just really,
Or arrested.
Like, yes, threats, but just
awful.
I had a mom yesterday that she actually hung out in the back and listened to the little kids presentation that I was doing, and she came up. She's like, "Yeah, my 10-year-old, I allowed him to have Fortnite, and I could hear him screaming like homophobic words, like in the next room." And she comes in, she's like, "What are you saying?" And he's just like, "Well, that's just how we talk on when we're on the thing." So there's that.
Yeah.
But yes, but kids feel really powerless when someone's doing this to them, because it's not something they can rightly stop. Like, it's just kind of coming at them, and if they feel like, if I go to a parent or a teacher about it, especially if this is someone they do know, let's say it's a student at the school, then they're ratting on that student. They're jeopardizing relationships. They're pulling parents into, or adults into, a space that the other kids are like, we don't want any adults involved in this. And so now, if you're complaining about this happening to you, you're gonna make things bad for all of us. And so that kid then gets retaliated on, even just ostracized among the peers. So there's a lot of pressure for these kids not to say anything, just take it. And so what we recommend for students is help them be more resilient. So, if these things happen to you, we recommend, don't respond. That's a problem. Like, kids will hit back. It escalates, and then it does end up in a fist fight at school. especially right after COVID, you had kids online for that entire year and a half or whatever it was. And then they come back to school and there was a ton of fights because all the things being said online for an entire school year,
Yeah.
like came to fruition, toe to toe in the schoolyard. So there was a ton of fights right after that. But we tell them don't reply. You should take a screenshot. If it doesn't stop, take it to a school official, and then block and report them to the hosting site.
Yeah.
And I'm just afraid that a lot of kids aren't going to take it to the school official, but we also want to make sure that if they see something that looks threatening or something that looks a little scary, that they do that and don't hold on to that information. Because again, it's really, it's going to cause a ton of anxiety for them. But if there's a kid out there that's really ruminating about death or dying or something like that, that's a student that we need to identify and help.
Yeah.
So we try to tell students like, hey, you're not getting them in trouble. You're actually helping them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, and don't share that with, and the other thing is, grab a screenshot, but don't share it with your friends. If you want to share it with a trusted adult at school.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you agree with this, but my assessment of group text is it's a closed version of social media. You're getting a lot of the same issues. You're getting inappropriate content. You're getting lots of dopamine every time those come in because these kids they can't help themselves. It's rapid fire back and forth, hundreds of notifications. To me, it's the same thing. And there's so many parents that say like, oh yeah, I'm not going to give my kids social media, but they let them group text at very young ages. And I just don't think they realized how rampant a lot of these issues are. I mean, we talked about bullying, but there's also inappropriate content. It's every issue that I can think of other than curation AI exists on group text than exists on social media.
Yeah. I give parents a very basic definition of social media, and all that is some electronic device or app that allows you to communicate with another human being, whatever that might be. So even if you're texting one-to-one, that is still social media. And so you got to wrap your brain around whatever that is and figure it out. So like even I had a case where a little kid, like 9 years old, he meets a person on Roblox who is identifying as a child but really is an adult, and this kid has an iPad. He's playing it on the iPad, and the guy says, hey, like all predators, they want to move you off the public site and get you into a private chat where they can groom. And he said, yeah, let's can you download like Telegram or something? And the kid's like, no, I can't, like my parents have locked down the App Store. And he goes, well, what kind of device do you have? He goes, well, I have an iPad. He goes, do you have Apple Notes, the Notes app? He goes, yeah, I do. So he sent him a note, and now they're collaborating on the note, and the kid's taking pictures. So if you take a picture, if you're in the note, at the bottom there's a little camera icon. If you tap on that, by default, the image that you take gets embedded into the note and does not go into the camera roll.
Yeah.
So this man was manipulating this boy into taking images of himself and sharing it through the Apple Notes app. And the parents noticed that their child was behaving very strangely, and they kind of started talking to him about it. And the kid broke down, started crying. He said, my friend said he's going to kill himself. And so what they ended up finding the whole thing, but basically what was happening, that this guy was saying, if you don't send me these images, I'm going to kill myself. And he built a relationship with this boy, and this boy's like, oh, I don't want you to hurt yourself, so I'll send you these images. Yeah. So, and it was all happening through Apple Notes. And the dad who called me, and in fact, he had went to my presentation, he went home, and all this kind of happened after that. So he came back, he calls me, and, as a dad, for me to talk to another father over the phone who's, breaking down and crying and just feeling like he completely failed his son, because his job is to like protect his son. And he's the one, I gave him this iPad and I gave him the, the thing. And, for me as a dad, like that just, it's horrible. And I'm like, hey brother, it's not your fault. You're in good company. This stuff is set up. I feel like it's set up for us to fail. And it's so difficult to kind of wrangle all this together. But again, if we're giving our children access to these devices and we're giving them access to these apps where they can communicate with other people, then we have to kind of wrap our brains around how that's happening and make a decision. Can we make this safe? Should we even have it in the first place? Like kind of asking these questions before we say yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We do the "it's not your fault" message all the time. It's not the kid's fault. It's not the parents' fault. It's not even the school's fault, right? I mean, these systems are designed to hold our attention, and, they're going to do, the big tech is going to do whatever it needs to do, to make their money, whether it's video games or social media or Apple or anything else, right? I mean, iPad is an adult product too, with retrofits on it, and kids will find the workarounds. And if they don't know how to yet, they will eventually. Whether it's in this unfortunate situation, it was an adult grooming them, it's going to be an older kid that shows them how to get around, the controls that are on there. So I just don't think parents really understand that. So I think like hearing those stories from you just really hits it home. There's endless anecdotes like the ones you're talking about out there. So, and it's not the parents' fault. It's not anybody's fault. I've kept you so long, but I want to ask you one more thing if I can, because I think the most important elephant in the room is what I call it. And you touched on it, but it's school shootings. And this is one of the main concerns that parents that are pushing back on phone-free policies cite as the reasons why. There was a professor at Northeastern University that calculated this. The risk of a school shooting is 1 in 5 million. It's less likely than a shark attack, which you mentioned earlier, a plane crash, or being struck by lightning, just to name a few. And I know that's hard to look at things that way, but I think we have to, as parents, to look at these statistics. So as a school safety expert, do you think, and I know you've answered this already, but smartphones belong on K through 12 campuses from a safety perspective?
Yeah.
And are they helpful specifically in an active shooter situation?
All right. So let me preface this by saying that, in addition to doing the cyber safety stuff, I was a behavioral threat assessor, right? Yeah. And I also teach behavioral threat assessment to school districts all over the United States. So also teaching school staff how to prevent and respond to a critical incident, i.e., like a school shooting, like how you do that. So I take this very seriously, and we have to have that training for staff because we can't let it happen even once. So what the likelihood of it ever happening in your school is so small, but we have to have the mentality that it could happen here, and we need to have a system to keep it from happening. So every school needs to have that. Every police department supporting schools need to have that. That being said, in a critical incident, no matter what it is, especially if it's imminent, like life-threateningly imminent, like a school shooting, could be earthquake, whatever. The safest thing for your child to be doing is having their hands free and directing their attention to the adult in that room. Yep. Period. They shouldn't be on their phone. They shouldn't be trying to grab their backpack, whatever. Like, they need to stop what they're doing, and they need to have hands free so that they can, and maybe that they need to get up and run, right? Or something. And so their attention needs to be 100% on that adult, who then is directing them to do whatever they need to be safe. And so anything other than that is going against their ability to be successful in that situation. And God forbid our kids are ever faced with a critical incident that's like life or death. But so the idea of having a phone is not going to make them more safe. It's going to make them less safe. And there's just no way else around it. So and all school districts know this, like all police departments, we all know this.
Yeah.
And it seems like the only people who don't know this is parents.
Yep.
And again, they're kind of hanging their hat on the wrong thing. How are we keeping our kids safe? So again, I might have said this already, but schools are the safest place for your child to be, even safer than their own home. In fact, the drive to and from the school is the most dangerous part of their day. They're more likely to die in a car accident or injured in a car accident, like hundreds or maybe thousands of times more than anything else in their life, especially a school shooting. So when I do my presentation, I show a graph at the end about, like abductions, school shootings, and then I show suicide, drug
Yeah.
overdoses, like all the other things. And when you kind of look at it, it's kind of ridiculous, right? That we're worried about these things that are hardly even, making a showing on the graph when you have things
Yeah.
over here. So yeah, there's a lot of things that parents can do to turn around their children's mental health and their
Hmm.
own personal safety, and it's not giving them a phone. It's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
It's actually taking that technology away from them until an appropriate time, which is probably going to be, it'll be high school for a smartphone. I tell parents, if your kid's in middle school and they absolutely need a phone, like maybe you have a kid who's like living in, going back between two households or something,
Yeah.
give them a flip phone.
Right.
Give them a phone that cannot connect to the internet or apps.
Hmm.
And when it comes to social media, I like the recommendations in Jonathan Haidt's book,
Yep.
Anxious Generation. Wait till they're 16 or later,
Yep.
and wait in Discord and Snapchat. I would not recommend until your child is out of high school.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you've been so generous with your time. Thank you so much. I think it means a lot to hear these things from somebody that's just so knowledgeable on the safety side. But I love that you're also weaving in the mental health stuff because they're connected. I
Yeah.
talk about this all the time too with other experts. Like these technology, it's not one or the other. It's affecting mental health, it's affecting safety, and those two things are connected as well. So thank you for like painting such a clear picture on that. And I just really appreciate your time today.
You're welcome. Thanks for
Thank
having me.
you.